Lyra stumbled into the table from the force of the slap. A glass lid tipped and shattered across the floor. She cupped her cheek as pain bloomed hot, tears springing to her eyes. She bit her trembling lip and turned toward Julian in disbelief. His face was a dark mask of anger, like he was looking at the person he hated most in the world. Her gaze dropped. A heavy weight settled over her chest. He must truly hate her. Had she really expected him to listen to her side? From the moment they met, he'd never cared. In his eyes, she was scheming, evil. Stupid of her to expect warmth, or even the barest consideration. Something cut through Julian, slicing the rage clean, and dragged him back to the present. He stared at the hand he'd used to strike her. It was shaking. Fuck. What have I done? His eyes lifted to Lyra's downturned face. She was holding herself together by sheer will. Then she looked up at him. No anger, no defiance, just quiet resignation. She had never looked at him like that before. He reached for her without thinking, only knowing he needed to comfort her, to turn back time, to keep his mind from running away. But the damage was done. Lyra flinched and stepped out of reach. His expression had changed, yes, but she didn't dare try to read it. He'd already shown her what he thought of her. Any lingering hope that things might improve between them was nothing but a foolish dream. She was an Omega with nothing to offer. She couldn't hope for what others had. If anything was true, it was this: she was destined to be unloved. Whether she liked it or not, she lived at the bottom of the pyramid, and there was nothing she could do about it. Nothing about how people chose to treat her. They hated her on sight without knowing her. She could fight, but she would never win. That was what it meant to be an Omega. If she didn't act like one, she wouldn't survive the palace. Quietly, she sank to her knees and began picking up the shards of glass, piece by glittering piece. She was an Omega. She had no right, forgettability, to challenge the king. Goddess knew what he'd do if she tried anything like that in front of his future queen. The only thing she could do was be true to her place. Julian turned to Crystal and offered his hand. She took it, rose gracefully, and rested her fingers on his arm. "You didn't have to hit her so hard," she murmured, a mask of pity softening her features as she glanced at Lyra. "I wasn't hurt after all. If you punish her too severely, it might look like you have a personal vendetta. Everyone makes mistakes sometimes." He couldn't admit that none of this had anything to do with Crystal. He'd watched the entire performance with his own eyes. He hadn't struck Lyra for being a bad maid. Still, he said lightly, there's no space for such behavior in the palace. "I know," Crystal replied, voice gentle, "but we have to be tolerant at times. After all, she's just a weak Omega, probably uneducated too. Sometimes they don't know better, so we must be patient and hope they improve." Julian nodded and forced a smile. "You'll make a good queen. I have no patience for many things. You could teach me a thing or two." Of course, he knew she was probably more impatient than he was, but if she wanted to play the angel, he'd let her. "That's what mates are for," Crystal said. She slid her hand up and down his arm, pressing closer, close enough that he could feel the soft weight of her breast against him. "We should complement each other. I'm sure there are many things I can learn from you too. I'm looking forward to it." "Mates?" The word filled Lyra's mouth with bitterness. She swallowed it down and kept her eyes on the floor. They deserved each other, two poisonous snakes, performing sweetness while they waited to strike. She felt stupid for ever asking Julian not to choose Crystal. Her mind had been clouded by sex, their bond pulsing strong. But in the harsh clarity of daylight, she couldn't care less whether he ended up with Crystal or Olivia or anyone else. She would focus on one thing, finding a way to leave the palace. If a chance came, she'd take it without hesitation. There was nothing for her here, just like there had been nothing for her at Devon's pack. If there was a place for her in this world, she would find it. Crystal sent her inside the villa to clean, and Lyra was grateful to escape their sight. By the time she finished, Julian had gone. Crystal gave her no more chores and let her leave. On her way back to the main residence, she spotted Zero up ahead. Without thinking, she veered down a different path and quickened her steps. Seconds later, his voice carried after her. "Lyra." She pretended not to hear and walked faster. Footsteps hurried behind her. Zero moved ahead and stepped into her path. "Lyra, hey," he greeted, warm and bright. His smile was infectious. She almost returned it. Almost. But she couldn't encourage him. She'd already caused conflict between him and his parents. She wouldn't cause more. "Hey," she said, edging aside. "Sorry, I have to go to work." She tried to pass, but he caught her hand, gentle but firm. "I'm sorry about yesterday," he said, the cheer gone from his voice. "My parents shouldn't have treated you like that. It wasn't your fault." Exactly why she needed to avoid him. He was too good to her, and that wasn't good for any of them. "I've forgotten about it," she said. "Then why are you avoiding me?" he asked. She lifted her chin so she wouldn't look as flighty as she felt. "I have work to do. I can't dally." He nodded, but didn't let go. "I like you, Lyra. I keep thinking about you, and it hurts to see people treat you so badly. I want to take care of you. Will you let me?" She hadn't expected that. Looking into those honest, stunning eyes, her heart kicked hard. How she wanted to get lost there, to bask in his warmth, to fold into his arms and rest. But she couldn't. She could dream, yes, but some things she couldn't allow herself to touch, no matter how badly she wanted them. She eased her hand free and shook her head. "Don't say things like that." "Would you think about it? I know it's sudden, and I'm sorry for springing it on you like this." He apologized. "No," Lyra said, firm. She shook her head. "If you still want us to be friends, or whatever this is, you have to forget about it. You can't have feelings for me, and I can't accept them. Please don't put me in a difficult position." Zero went quiet, then nodded and released her hand. Of course he did. Her gratitude pinched at her heart. It only made her more aware of how perfect he was, and how she'd never be lucky enough to be with a male like him. "It's okay," Zero said, steadying himself. He'd known it might not go well, but he couldn't keep it in any longer, not when he'd felt her pulling away, so he'd taken the risk. If there was any chance she might feel the same, any chance she'd accept his comfort, he wanted her to know he was there, that she could come to him when things got too hard. He ran a hand through his hair, remembering why he'd been looking for her in the first place. "Do you know about the competition held at the Queen Mother's birthday banquet every year?" "What competition?" she asked. "People can perform for the Queen Mother," he told her, "and she grants a wish to anyone who pleases her. I thought I should tell you in case you're interested." Lyra hadn't known. But the moment he said it, she saw it, the opportunity. The Queen Mother granting a wish? Her pulse leaped at the thought of what she'd ask if she won. This could be her way out. "When is it?" she asked quickly. "And what kind of performances are we talking about?" When Lyra learned the Queen Mother's birthday was only a week away, next Saturday, she grabbed every spare minute she could find to plan a performance. The window was small, but she refused to waste it. Even if she failed, at least she'd know she tried. She didn't have to do it alone. Whenever she could slip out to the forest around the palace, Zero went with her. Performances for the Queen Mother ranged from combat displays to magic tricks and everything in between. So even as an Omega, she still had a chance. All she needed was something that would truly amuse the Queen Mother. During the day, she worked as hard as her body would allow. She tuned out the other maids' insults and stayed far from trouble. The last thing she wanted was the dungeon, especially not on the eve of the Queen Mother ceremony. To her surprise, Thea stopped trying to make her life a misery. She was still strict, still unsmiling, but no extra punishments, no petty traps. At first, Thea had pegged her as one of those omegas who entered the palace to seduce the king or any high-ranking male within reach. Those girls slacked off and didn't last. But as Lyra kept her head down and worked, quiet, steady, thorough, Thea's guard eased. Sure, Thea still suspected she might be angling for the king, and his cousin, Goddess, knew who else, and she despised that type. Yet as head servant, she valued a maid who did her job and caused no fuss. It made Thea's job easier, too. Out in the forest, something unexpected bloomed. Lyra realized she could communicate with animals. Not just sense them, communicate. Some werewolves, usually the high-ranked, had talents of their own, but she had never heard of anyone speaking across species like this. Right away, she knew this was it. This was the thread she could spin into something that stood out. As an omega and a slave, she wouldn't be allowed to present a gift herself, so she entrusted the performance to Zero. He would be the face. She would be the hands behind the curtain. Soon, the day of the ceremony arrived. The banquet hall glittered with important guests, alphas and lunas from across the kingdom. Lyra worked as a server, which meant she could stay in the hall and watch. When the gift presentations began, Zero stepped forward with a calm smile and a surprise, a glass tank filled with goldfish. At first, the guests murmured, was he truly gifting fish? What was so special about that? Then Lyra reached out with her mind, and the goldfish responded. They swam with bright, precise turns. A beat later, they arranged themselves into a neat formation that read, Happy birthday, Your Royal Highness. The hall went silent, then burst into applause. The Queen Mother leaned forward, delighted. She asked Zero to do it again. This time, everyone watched from the first ripples to the last letter. When the words held, Lyra urged the fish into a few graceful jumps, little arcs like sparks, then had them reform the message once more. Praise flooded the room for Zero. Lyra's heart hammered as she waited for the Queen Mother's verdict. The Queen Mother's smile was wide and genuine, her eyes lit with awe. Maybe it had worked. I've never seen anything like that before, Isla said to Zero. When did you learn that? Actually, I did not do anything, Zero confessed. He glanced toward the wall where Lyra stood. Lyra is the one guiding the fish. She's one of the servants. Oh, Isla said, and for a breath, Lyra's stomach dropped. Would the Queen Mother be offended that the performer was a servant? Well then, get her here so she can get her wish, Isla continued. This is the most interesting thing I've seen all night. Lyra felt like she was floating. It seemed too good to be real. Zero gave her a small, encouraging nod, and she stepped forward. Her legs turned to lid. Each step felt like a mile. The weight of eyes and whispers pressed against her back. I loved your performance, Isla told her when she reached the front. I'll grant you one wish. What do you want? Freedom. Lyra drew a breath. This was it. I would like permission to leave the palace. Isla's brows rose. That's what you want? Most people did not wish to leave the palace, certainly not an Omega. For many, it was the best fate they could hope for, but not for her. Yes, Your Highness. All right, the Queen Mother said, since that's what you want. Mother, no, Julian cut in, stepping between them without warning. You cannot grant her that wish. Why not? Isla asked, her tone cooling. I keep my promises, and she won a wish. She is a slave I brought to the palace myself, Julian said, his eyes fixed on Lyra, hard and cold as pebbles. She cannot leave. Lyra's fingernails bit into her palms. Why now? He had ignored her all week. Could he not ignore her for one more night? Well, in that case, Isla said after a thoughtful pause, I'm afraid I cannot grant your wish, but I can give you something else in its place. What do you say to a spot at the royal training camp? Once you complete the program, you'll become an official of the palace and leave your slave status. Lyra had braced herself for loss, not for this. The royal training camp? Only high-ranked pack members were invited there. No Omega she knew had ever set foot inside, and to remove her slave status, even if she remained at the palace for a time, her life would change. It would become bearable, and maybe, just maybe, she could find a way out on her own. I accept the offer, she said, bowing her head. Thank you, Your Highness. When Lyra left the banquet hall after the ceremony, Crystal waylaid her. Like Julian, Crystal had left her alone after that first day, and Lyra had hoped it would stay that way. No such luck. What do you think you're doing? Crystal crossed her arms and watched her with suspicious eyes. What do you mean? Lyra asked, genuinely confused. What had she done now? Crystal scoffed and stepped in so close Lyra could smell nothing but her perfume. An Omega at the royal training camp? She huffed. Is that what you wanted all along? Think it'll keep you close to Julian? No. What I wanted was to get the hell out of here so I never have to see your stupid face again. If you have a problem with that, Lyra said flatly, take it up with the Queen Mother. Crystal snickered. She had been thrilled when she heard Lyra's request to Isla, until Julian ruined everything. Why did he care whether a lowly slave stayed at the palace or not? He should have just let her go. You better not cross my path, Crystal warned. We might be in the same palace, but if you offend me again, I'll make your life a living hell. Is that supposed to scare me? My life's been nothing but a living hell up to this point. Lyra stayed silent. Crystal turned on her heel and walked away. The moment she disappeared from sight, she disappeared from Lyra's mind. Lyra was too excited about attending the training camp to dwell on threats. The best part, she didn't have to wait for the program to end to see changes. Because she would be training at the Royal Academy, she was no longer working as a maid. She was moving out of the dormitory to a different building with a proper room. The next morning, on her way to the academy, she ran into Julian. A cold ripple of foreboding slid through her. What if he was here to say she was no longer allowed to attend? She would have preferred to walk past him without a word, but he was the Leakin King, and she was still just a slave. Best not to give him any reason to have his mother withdraw her gift. Your Majesty, she murmured, eyes on the ground. She could feel his glare burning into the top of her head. Don't think this changes anything, he said coldly. Just because I kept you here doesn't mean I'll acknowledge you as my mate. You'd better not say anything. Lyra almost laughed. She better not say anything? Even if she did, who would believe her? They'd call her crazy, desperate for the king's attention. Sure, give everyone another reason to treat her like an outcast. You're the one who forced me to stay, she said, unable to hold back the bite in her voice. Everything he said made her want to scream. She lifted her chin. I could be out of your hair by now, but you stopped me. What makes you think I want anyone to know the truth? You should decide what you want. I want to have never met you, but that ship has sailed, hasn't it? Julian snapped. If not for that stupid curse, he never would have stopped his mother. Hell, he never would have brought her to the palace. I didn't ask you to bring me, Lyra shot back. If you don't want to see me or be associated with me, reject me. What are you waiting for? It was a puzzle she tried to unravel 100 times, only getting more twisted. Devon hadn't gotten rid of her because of the king's law, but the king wasn't answerable to anyone. No one knew she was his mate. He could reject her and move on like nothing happened. So why keep her close and keep antagonizing her? I suggest you watch how you talk to me, he warned, voice low and dark. A shiver traced her spine, but it didn't shake her. It only made her want to push harder. Or what? He wasn't going to reject her, throw her out, or kill her. So what the hell did he mean with all these threats? Julian ground his teeth, fighting the impulse burning through him. Daylight. Outside. Anyone could be watching. Anyone could walk by. He couldn't show her what. He had a sudden urge to throw her over his lap and spank the insolence out of her. Tie her up and tease her to the edge, taking what he wanted and giving her nothing. She'd beg for what he could give her. Please, Your Majesty. Her eyes dared him. She had no idea what she was playing with, and he had no idea why he let her get to him. Better to ignore her existence. He wasn't going to let some Omega keep messing with his head. Or you'll wish someone taught you how to talk to your fucking king, he growled through his teeth. With one last menacing glare, he stalked away. Lyra released a shaky breath and kept walking toward the school. She was never going to figure out Julian's deal, so she pushed him to the back of her mind. No one was going to ruin today. She had always wanted to go to school. Devin had denied her that, forbidding her from any training, as if he wanted to keep her as helpless as possible. But now she was attending the Royal Training Camp at the Royal Academy. It felt like a dream. It was a dream for Omegas. The school sat within the palace grounds, but far from the main palace, quiet, spacious, good for study and combat training. Lyra arrived earlier than stipulated on purpose, hoping to avoid attention. In the classroom, she chose a seat at the back, trying to be invisible. If she was lucky, they wouldn't even notice she was there. Everything went according to plan until Crystal walked in. Her gaze swept the room like a hawk searching for prey. When it landed on Lyra, her lips curled into a sneer. She strode over with a cluster of students behind her, dragging the whole room's attention along. You really showed up, Crystal said, incredulous. You've got some guts. Murmurs rose at once. Who is that? Didn't you hear? Some Omega slave got permission from the Queen Mother to attend. An Omega slave? So that's her. I can't believe I'm in the same class with her. Why wouldn't I be here? Lyra asked Crystal. I'm here to learn, like the rest of you. Like the rest of you, Crystal mimicked, sing-song, mocking. We are not like you, and you're not like us. We can't study alongside someone like you. She gestured to her posse. What do you say, guys? If my parents knew there was an Omega in my class, they'd freak out, a she-wolf said. My friends would disown me, another added. I feel disgusted, a male muttered. How am I supposed to concentrate with her filthy scent polluting the air? Crystal sighed loudly. Looks like nobody wants you here, so we'll fix that. Get her out, boys. She stepped back. Two males stepped forward. The blonde one with the eyebrow piercing, Drake, smirked. Come with me, sweetheart. I'll show you where you belong. I'm not going anywhere, Lyra said. Oh, the other male, Roman, cooed. She's got spunk. I like them that way, Drake drawled. That submissive stuff gets boring sometimes. Drake grabbed Lyra's arm and yanked her up. She was no match for his strength, but she didn't make it easy. She dug in her heels, pulling back, until Roman shoved her from behind. She stumbled forward and slammed into a desk. Chairs scraped. The entire class was on their feet, phones out, recording. Drake's nails bit into her arm as he dragged her along. The rest of the class cheered and laughed, some sticking out a foot to trip her. Look at her, Drake said, pushing her hair out of her face. What should we call her? The intruder? Lyra knocked his hand away as laughter burst around them. "Let me go." Drake leaned in, mouth near her ear. "How about we go somewhere alone, just you and me? Away from prying eyes. I can show you a good time. Ever been with a proper male before?" "You better leave me alone," she warned. Or what? Or what? She had no power to fight them head-on, but she'd have something else. "If you touch me, the king won't let you off easily," she said. Drake blinked, then laughed out loud. "Did you hear that, guys? The king is going to protect her." More laughter rolled through the room. "She must be special." "Why would the king care what happens to you?" Crystal demanded back in Lyra's face. "You're nothing but an Omega. He has no interest in you. Get that into your thick head." She leaned in, voice dropping for Lyra's ears alone. "I warned you, but you don't listen, huh?" Crystal stepped back and shrugged. "Unfortunately, the king cannot come to you, so you'll have to make do with me. I'm the only one here who can represent the king as his fiancé, and I say you get gone." The others cheered while Drake grinned, wild-eyed. "I guess that means you're all mine now." They parted, clearing a path as Drake dragged Lyra toward the door. Not a single person stepped in to help. She wasn't surprised. She was an eyesore to them, and there weren't many high-ranking werewolves who treated Omegas with kindness like Zero did. She wished her mate, more than capable of protecting her, would appear and stop them. Too bad reality was the opposite. Even if he showed up, she couldn't put it past him to watch and enjoy while they tormented her. After all, he couldn't risk anyone knowing that a lowly slave like her was his mate. Her pulse spiked. Panic clawed up her throat when a familiar voice cut through the room. "What do you think you're doing?" The clamor died at the sound of Zero's voice. Drake kept his hold on Lyra as Zero approached. "Just having a little fun," he said. "What does it look like?" "Let go of her," Zero ordered. Drake glanced at Lyra, then back at Zero. "What does it have to do with you?" "She's coming with me." "Like hell she is." Zero marched forward. He took Lyra's other arm and tugged her to him, his glare fixed on Drake. "You better leave her alone." He drew Lyra with him and walked her back to her seat. Drake could have pushed it, but he knew Zero's rank and lineage, and he wasn't interested in a physical altercation. That didn't mean he was going to let it go. He raised his voice so everyone could hear. "She's just an Omega. What are you so defensive for? Or is it that you've already tasted her and don't want to share?" Laughter rippled through the trainees. Lyra tried to pull her hand free, not wanting rumors to snake back to Julian. Zero's grip tightened. He gave her a steady, reassuring look. "Don't worry. I won't let anyone hurt you." His words comforted her and made her heart ache. "Maybe you shouldn't do this," she whispered. "You have nothing to do with me." "I told you, I like you, and I won't let them bully you. Even if you aren't my destined mate, I'll protect you, no matter what." Lyra had no idea what to say. She couldn't seem to push him away. He didn't fear going against Julian. Surrounded by high-ranking wolves, Zero hadn't hesitated to step in. He wasn't afraid of anything, and he wasn't embarrassed to be seen with her. But you..." Zero pressed a finger to her lips, silencing her. He stepped closer, lowering his face to hers. Heat prickled across her skin. Her heart thudded. She could barely breathe as she stared into his mesmerizing eyes. "But nothing," he said softly. "Don't worry about me. No one can touch me. And I want them to think twice before picking on you next time." Before she could figure out what he meant, Zero leaned in and pressed his lips to the finger resting against her mouth. Lyra's eyes flew wide. She froze, shocked. After a few seconds, he pulled back and gave her a gentle smile. Lyra thought her heart might stop. He hadn't kissed her, but everyone else would think he had. She stepped back, putting distance between them. The class was eerily silent. Yeah, they must be shocked too. Zero finally released her hand. Lyra stared at anything but him, until she realized why the room had gone so quiet. In the doorway stood Julian, eyes blazing, glaring daggers straight at Zero. For the second time in a minute, Lyra feared her heart would give out. Oh God, what was she going to do? Zero saw him too and shifted, placing himself squarely in front of Lyra, shielding her. Nausea rolled through her. Even from across the room, she could feel Julian's anger pulsing through the air in waves. After his run-in with Lyra, Julian met with Thea in his office. Thea wanted the details for the engagement party. After Julian's announcement at the banquet, everyone was waiting for the official day, his engagement to Crystal. She wanted a heads up so she could start preparations early to make sure the ceremony was up to standard, but Julian didn't seem concerned. Forget about it for now, he told her, half his mind still stuck on the so-called conversation he just had with Lyra. We might never get to that part. That's what he hoped. If he found what he needed quickly enough, there would be no formal engagement. Oh, all right, Thea said. She didn't ask further. She lived long enough in the palace to know when not to pry, and she could tell Julian had an ulterior motive for announcing that Crystal would be the future queen. She couldn't ask about his intentions with Crystal Black, but she could ask about Lyra. Tongues had been wagging ever since Julian stopped his mother from letting Lyra leave the palace. It was unusual for the king to be so interested in the fate of an inconsequential slave. Thea couldn't stop wondering what kind of interest he had in Lyra. Lyra moved from the Omega's dormitory and started attending the academy today, she informed him, trying to sound casual. Julian grunted and shuffled through a sheaf of papers. And? He asked, feigning disinterest. Thea hesitated. What do you think about her? Julian looked up. What do I think of her? His tone was incredulous. Had he slipped up? Had Thea noticed his special attention to Lyra? Why else ask his opinion of a slave? It's not like Lyra was his personal maid. You brought her to the palace, Thea pointed out. At first I thought she wouldn't fit in, but she proved me wrong. She works well and doesn't cause trouble. Julian stared at Thea like she'd grown a second head. Wasn't this the same woman who'd once rambled, complaining about Lyra and asking him to get rid of her? I thought you didn't like her. At first, I didn't, confessed. I was a little biased, and how I treated her might have caused a few mistakes. But after a while, I realized she isn't all that bad. Julian snickered. I thought you were smart. Turns out you've fallen for her act too. She's quite the actress. Trust me. So you don't like her, Thea noted. What's there to like? Julian snapped. Why didn't you let her leave the palace then? Julian clasped his hands on the desk and glared. Do you have something you want to say? I'm just saying, I don't know what she did to deserve such harsh judgment from you, Thea said. Maybe you're biased against her because she's an Omega. Are you saying I'm biased against Omegas? Julian demanded. Would you choose one as your queen? Thea returned. Julian clenched his jaw. He couldn't tell whether she knew something or not. Go ahead, answer her, Yuri goaded. Why are we talking about her? Julian asked, annoyance thinly veiled. Do you have nothing to do? Just admit it, Yuri kept on. You didn't let her leave because you have feelings for her. Feelings? Okay, both of them were crazy. He hadn't stopped Lyra from leaving to indulge some crush. He'd done it to protect himself from the curse, period. He didn't no idea why Thea thought he had any personal interest in an Omega slave, and his wolf couldn't be more mistaken. "I'll take my leave," Thea said, and slipped out. Julian sat back, head thudding into the headrest. He cursed under his breath. Did he dislike Lyra because he was biased toward Omegas? Hell no. If she wasn't a lying, cheating, manipulating, conniving Omega, he wouldn't have any. "Any problem making her your queen?" Yuri finished for him when he hesitated. "I thought Omegas were too weak to become queen." In a mocking echo of Julian's voice, he sneered, "This kingdom cannot have an Omega queen." "Shut up," Julian muttered. "Aren't you ashamed of yourself?" Yuri asked. "You're the king, but you're biased against your own subjects." Did Yuri even understand his disappointment? He had waited years, searched the entire kingdom for his mate, and this was what he found. Her. The gods had to be joking. Nobody should wait so long only to find some pathetic mate. A knock cut through his thoughts. A palace official stepped in and bowed. She informed him the principal of the Royal Academy had requested he deliver a speech to the trainees at the camp. Julian almost declined. Lyra flashed through his mind. She would be there. So? It wouldn't hurt or mean anything to see how she was holding up. Or, rather, to see how the other students and the staff were handling it. An Omega attending the Royal Academy was unheard of. As king, he could check that things were running smoothly. He agreed to head to the academy. The principal received him and led him toward the classroom where the new trainees were gathered. Their footsteps echoed down the corridor, the smell of paper and chalk hanging in the air. The principal stepped in first. Julian followed. He crossed the threshold, then froze. His wolf went berserk. The bond snapped tight, his eyes finding Lyra instantly, just in time to see Zero kiss her. "Fuck her." "Mine," Yuri growled. Zero shifted, placing himself in front of Lyra, blocking Julian's view. The nerve. A dozen violent endings sketched themselves in Julian's mind. Each one left Zero's body on the floor. But he was the king. He couldn't fly into a rage in front of students. His gaze locked with Zero's. "With me. Now." Hidden behind Zero, Lyra gulped. Why was Julian suddenly there? Had he heard her silent plea? That happened with mates, so maybe... She cut the thought off hard. Delusion. He didn't recognize her as his mate, and he didn't care what happened to her. The sooner she got rid of the part that kept expecting him to behave like a proper mate, the better. She knew better. "Yes," Ray cheered. "What?" Lyra asked, baffled by her wolf's excitement. Julian looked like he wanted to murder Zero. "Can't you see? He's jealous," Ray pointed out. "If he didn't care at all, why would he be jealous?" Lyra could think of 1,000 reasons. A male like Julian wouldn't take it kindly when another male touched their mate, whether he accepted her or not. She was his property. It didn't matter that he didn't want her. Seeing someone else pay attention to her would still make him act territorial and possessive. He didn't care about her. He wanted control, keep her on a leash. She was his to make miserable, and no one else could make her feel different. It wasn't about her. It was about Zero defying him. She knew Zero had been trying to protect her by faking the kiss, but Julian obviously thought they had really kissed. Now, there was no doubt Zero would be in trouble with him. "I'm sorry," she whispered to Zero. He turned, eyes softening. "You did nothing wrong. I'll handle him." Giving her hand one final squeeze, he walked down the aisle toward Julian. Concern bloomed in her chest, and she considered trying to explain everything. But she knew better than anyone. It would be useless. Julian never believed her. She'd only make things worse for Zero. He can hide it from everyone, but he can't fool himself, Ray said. He's your mate, and he can't ignore the bond. You belong to each other, and he can't stand it when another male is close to you. Yeah, right, Lyra shot back, dry and sharp. I've had two mates, and the bond has proven to be quite helpful. The bond had brought her nothing but pain. Devon's actions hurt not because she loved him, but because the bond tied her to him like a puppet. It was the same with Julian. The bond meant nothing to them except a means to control and use her. It gave them power over her, while it was her biggest weakness. For most werewolves, the bond was a wonder. For Lyra, it was a curse. She envied humans who weren't subjected to it. Imagine living without a jerk alpha or a lichen king holding your fate in his hands. After Zero and Julian left, the principal called the class to order. Students shuffled back to their seats. His Majesty had a few words for you, but it looks like he has urgent matters to deal with, so unfortunately he can't address you, he said. A few groans rose, but he lifted a hand and the room quieted. As you all know, we have a special student with us today. His gaze landed on Lyra. Heat crept up her neck. Was that necessary? Dozens of dirty glares slammed into her. Training in our community, and I hope you all keep that in mind, the principal continued. Welcome to everyone. Most Omegas couldn't even step inside the palace grounds, let alone into the Royal Academy. She'd gotten here by a rare stroke of opportunity, and the students had already shown her exactly how unwelcome she was. Do not cause any trouble for Lyra, and if anyone does, please let me know, the principal told her. We do not condone indiscipline in this school. No one said a word. After what happened with Zero, none of them wanted to take the risk. If she was with Zero, anyone who bullied her would be going up against the royal family. No wonder she'd gotten admittance to the Royal Academy. Even after the principal left, nobody tried to say anything nasty to Lyra. Eventually, classes began. Her classmates shifted from ridiculing her to ignoring her, fine by her. If every day was like this, she'd actually learn something here. After the final class before lunch, a female approached her with a bright smile and a hand outstretched. Hi, my name is Beryl from the Beaver Pack. Lyra blinked, taken aback by the friendliness. She stayed cautious, but Beryl's smile looked too sincere to be false. Hello, I'm Lyra, she said, shaking her hand. I noticed you're familiar with Zero, Beryl said. He's actually my cousin. Oh, really? Lyra asked, surprised. Beryl nodded. Yeah. Do you want to come to the cafeteria with me? Sure, Lyra said. Beryl seemed as kind as Zero, which made Lyra wonder if Julian was the only unpleasant one in their family. What do you think of the academy? Beryl asked as they headed down the hall. I'm so excited to be here. The things they teach here, you'll never learn them elsewhere. Lyra could see it, the way Beryl's eyes twinkled when she talked. She cared about what she could learn, not just the academy's prestige. Maybe they shared that same hunger for study. I'm happy to be here too, Lyra said. It's unbelievable for me, so I hope to learn as much as I can. The classes are great and all, but I can't wait for the combat training, Beryl went on. I love physical training the most. Same, Lyra said, a little breathless with excitement. I'm not very strong, so I jump at any chance to learn something new. Well, you couldn't be in a better place, Beryl said. You'll have the best instructors here. Lyra knew training with high-ranked werewolves wouldn't be fun for an Omega like her, but she wouldn't let that stop her. They could watch and laugh if they wanted. She only cared about improving, and it felt like she'd just made a friend. At the cafeteria, they took a corner table. Lyra unpacked the lunch Thea had prepared at the palace. She shared a portion, and Beryl's eyes went wide at the first bite. Okay, that's incredible, Beryl murmured, grinning. So I think I should give you a heads up about some of the people here, Beryl said after a while. Yes, please, Lyra replied. Most of them are strangers to me, but they hate me like they know me. Might as well know who I'm pissing off. This year, the number of trainees is smaller than usual, Beryl explained. But the ones attending all have high status and come from powerful packs. The most popular is Zero, and there's also Alpha Claude from the Frost Shadow pack. Oh, there's someone you should watch out for. Beryl leaned in, voice dropping. Victoria from Skylark Pack has been pursuing Zero since forever. She won't like that you and Zero are so close. She can rest assured, Lyra said. Alpha Zero and I are not mates. There's nothing going on between us. Beryl leaned back, one eyebrow arched. Are you sure? Everybody saw what happened between you two. Personally, I've never seen my cousin look at a she-wolf the way he looks at you. Lyra's cheeks warmed. No one had ever looked at her the way Zero did. He's very kind, that's all, she said softly. He's helped me a few times since I came to the palace. That sounds exactly like Zero, Beryl agreed. Then her expression turned serious. By the way, you know tonight is the full moon, right? Lyra nodded. Yeah. Not trying to scare you, but after training is done, don't go outside, Beryl warned. On nights like these, high-ranking werewolves go after unmarked wolves during their heat. They especially target omegas. And as you can see, there are a lot of unmated wolves gathered here. Lyra swallowed and nodded, taking it in. Another reason the life of omegas in this kingdom was miserable. They were at the mercy of more powerful wolves, and even after an attack, there was nothing they could do. That was just how things were. The only defense for an unmarked omega was to stay hidden, but that wasn't guaranteed when your hormones were raging and drawing every male like a beacon. She could stay hidden, and she would still endure a brutal heat cycle. Werewolves who had found their mates didn't have to suffer like that, but her case was different. Sure, Julian had slipped with her before, but... She remembered the look on his face when he saw Zero kissing her. He hated her even more now, no doubt. Yes, she had a mate, but she didn't believe he'd be there when her body was wrecked by need. Not for her. Not anymore. What do you want? Zero demanded as soon as he and Julian were clear of the school grounds. Julian scoffed and turned on him. What do I want? How about you keep your filthy hands to yourself and off my mate? Oh, so you care? Zero shot back. I thought you wanted nothing to do with her. What I do with her is none of your business, Julian snapped. She's my mate, not yours. If you're so starved for a female's attention, get it somewhere else. And if you're doing this to cross me, think again. Why would I do that? Zero stepped closer. Just admit it, you have feelings for her, but you keep acting like an asshole because you're too proud to accept it. If you don't want to claim her, why does it bother you so much when someone else pays attention to her? Attention? Julian scoffed. The kind of attention where you kiss her in front of everyone? What are you trying to prove? Forget about me and think about Lyra, Zero told him. If you don't acknowledge her as your mate, she's going to be targeted by other high-ranking wolves, like your new fiancé. Everybody was ganging up on her before you got there. She's an omega. She can't protect herself. If, as her mate, you won't do it, don't be sour when other people step in. Julian ground his teeth and glared at his cousin. Damn it. Why did he have to be right? He already knew Crystal was targeting Lyra. No doubt she'd rally the other werewolves at the academy to do the same. If he did nothing, Lyra would be in danger. But acknowledge her? Hell no. Powerful packs had been sniffing around his throne for years because he had no mate. If they learned he had an omega mate, they'd come at him even harder. So what? He retorted. Do you want me to go out there and tell everyone I found my mate, and she just happens to be a cheating omega? Trash? Right. That'll be such good news for the kingdom. Zero was usually restrained. He never kept quiet in the face of injustice, but he tried to be civil. It was getting harder by the second to listen to Julian spit insults and be a grade-A asshole. He curled his hand into a fist and swung, cracking Julian across the jaw. "You are a fucking disgrace," he snarled as Julian stared at him in disbelief. "What's the use of being the Leakin King if you can't protect your own mate? You're the one who enacted the law forbidding alphas from rejecting their mates, but you, as king, can't even uphold it. If that's what you're going to do, then do it already and set her free. You're worse for keeping her tied to you and refusing to take responsibility." Julian didn't try to hit back. Maybe he deserved it. Maybe Zero was right. He was the worst. But if the curse didn't exist, he would have rejected Lyra the moment he found out she was his mate. He would have set her free and forgotten her. Sure, he'd have gone against his own rule, but it would have been for the good of the kingdom. She was too weak to be queen. She couldn't withstand internal threats, let alone external dangers. She had nothing to offer the kingdom. He wouldn't risk its stability because of one female. If Zero couldn't understand that, there was nothing more to say. "Fine," Zero said at last, after Julian's long silence. He couldn't read the king's mind anymore. He thought Julian was not only a good king, but a good male. Maybe he'd been biased. "Since you won't take responsibility for her, I won't quit pursuing her. I'll stay by her side when she needs me, and I'll do my best to make her accept me. You can run around looking for your perfect queen and leave her the fuck alone." "I'm warning you," Julian gritted out. "She's not yours, and she'll never be. You're the one who should leave her alone." "I can't do that," Zero said. "I like her, and I'll take care of her whether you like it or not. I'll show her what it feels like to be with a male who truly cares." Julian felt the same anger that had flared when he saw Zero kiss Lyra surge back, hot and blinding. It ran in his veins, powering him up, filling his mind with ugly images. If Zero weren't his cousin, he wouldn't still be standing there talking about claiming his mate. The moment he laid a finger on Lyra, he'd have signed his death warrant. Through the mind link, Julian ordered the nearby guards to arrest Zero and confine him. Two burly guards emerged from the trees moments later, boots crunching on gravel. Seeing them, Zero exhaled. "Seriously? What are you going to do? Lock me up forever?" "I would keep my mouth shut if I were you," Julian growled. He wasn't the only angry one. If he left it to Yuri, Zero would have lost a few limbs already. Julian's eyes bled red. Zero saw it and decided not to push. Even if Julian didn't want to claim Lyra, he was still mated to her, and he'd be dangerously possessive when threatened. Nolan, his wolf, urged him to back down. Provoking a stronger male about his mate was like digging your own grave, and Nolan knew Zero was fearless enough to do it. Zero didn't resist when the guards took him by the arms and led him away. That didn't mean he was backing down. Not at all. He would be there for Lyra. No one, not even the Lecan King, would stop him. Julian cursed and raked both hands through his hair. With Zero gone, the rage finally ebbed. He hated that he had no control over the possessiveness consuming him. Lyra was his mate. Of course he was possessive. If Zero didn't stay away from her, Julian couldn't promise he wouldn't do something more drastic. That was the nature of werewolves. Even if he wanted nothing to do with her, the thought of her with another male made him see red. "If you don't want anyone else getting their hands on her, you'd better not leave her alone tonight," Yuri said quietly. "It's full moon night." Yuri's words stopped Julian cold. Shit. He was right. The thought of the horrors Lyra would go through if she was left alone tonight sent a chill down his spine. No, he couldn't leave her alone. After training, Lyra went straight to her bedroom and locked the door. The full moon wouldn't rise until after 10, and until then, everything felt normal. Then it crested the horizon, and her body plunged into chaos. It started as a light tingle skimming over her skin, then sharpened into something unbearable. She paced the room, trying to shake it off, but it clung to her. Every minute stretched into an agonizing hour. Heat pooled between her thighs, a steady slick ache deepening with every breath. Her scent thickened the air, saturating the room until it felt heavy and sweet. She dove into bed and cocooned herself in the bedding, as if she could trap it there, keep it from spilling out. A sharp knock hit the door. She went very still, listening. The knock came again, louder. "Who is it?" she called. "Open up." A man's voice, hard, commanding, punctuated by more pounding. Fear streaked through her. Drake. She knew that voice. He stopped knocking and slammed his shoulder into the door instead. Lara scrambled to the window. First floor, low enough to risk it. She unlatched it quietly, slipped over the ledge, drew a breath, and jumped. Pain blasted up her leg as she landed wrong. Her ankle buckled with a hot twist. Upstairs, wood splintered. The door gave way. She bit back a cry, pushed off, and hobbled into the shadows. She kept to the walls, gliding along the dark edges, avoiding the silver wash of moonlight. Step by step, she reached the end of the building and angled toward the main palace. A hand shot out from behind and yanked her into the bushes. She managed one scream before a palm clamped over her mouth. Julian caught Lyra in his arms and carried her to Beryl. Beryl wasn't just his mother's cousin's daughter. She was an accomplished wolf healer. He could trust her to care for Lyra and to keep quiet. Beryl was staying in one of the palace residences. She opened the door the moment he knocked. "What are you?" She stopped when she saw Lyra in his arms. She stepped back fast and waved him inside. Door shut, she strode past him toward the bedroom. What happened to her? Julian laid Lyra gently on the bed. Her face was bruised, her dress torn. He stepped back, jaw tight. "Help her." Beryl was already reaching for her medical bag. She sat beside Lyra, checked the cuts and bruises, then listened to her heartbeat and breathing. "Is she okay?" Julian asked. "She'll be," Beryl said at last. She looked from Lyra to Julian, understanding flickering in her eyes, and shot him a cutting look. "Where were you when this happened to her?" Julian's hands curled into fists. "What do you mean? Did something happen to her?" He thought he'd gotten there in time, right? Because if anyone had touched her, he'd turn the palace upside down to find them and string them up by the parts that mattered most. Gods, he hated himself for not getting to her sooner. "She was clearly attacked," Beryl said. "Fortunately, it's just surface wounds. I don't understand why you'd leave her alone if she's your mate. You know what happens tonight. Do you not care if she lives at all?" "Good question," Yuri said sourly. The hurt in his voice cut deep. "It's like you keep forgetting you need her to stay alive." She could have died. Julian knew it. Not just because he'd seen a knife at her throat. Those males would have used her and left her for dead, if not killed her outright. She couldn't die. If she did, he would too. Simple as that. He needed to protect her. Omega or not, she was his mate and tied to his curse. He couldn't stand aside and pretend he didn't care. He had to care, or he'd be damned too. "Can you heal her?" he asked Beryl. "Of course." Beryl rolled up her sleeves, grounding herself. Wolf healers were attuned to the body, able to channel energy precisely where it was needed, a gift that often ran in the blood. But she's very weak. She needs to build her strength. "Maybe you can help with that," Yuri snapped, "instead of always complaining about how weak and powerless your mate is." Beryl was always the smart one in this family. Beryl worked in steady, practiced motions, energy flowing through her hands. When she finished, they waited. Julian paced, heart a storm, hate and anger when he thought of Drake and his cronies, a fierce surge of protectiveness when he looked at Lyra, disgust when he thought of himself. Beryl watched him the way Zero had, like he was the worst mate to ever walk the earth. Zero's words rang in his head. What's the use of being the Leakin King if you cannot protect your own mate? A soft moan from the bed snapped both of them around. Beryl moved to Lyra's side, and Julian followed. Lyra's face tightened, her bottom lip caught between her teeth, her legs rubbing together restlessly. Is she okay? Julian asked, worry etched across his face. Is she in pain? Beryl blinked at him. The air was heavy with Lyra's scent. No, she's not okay. She's in heat, and it's going to be unbearable if she doesn't mate. Oh, Julian murmured, looking back at Lyra. The waves of energy rolling off her, the scent of her arousal. Yeah, he felt it. Heat shot through him, instant and visceral. She was the flame, and he was the moth. You should get her out of here, Beryl said. Julian scooped Lyra into his arms. It took Lyra 3 days to burn through the heat and another 2 to piece herself back together. When she finally returned to the academy after a week away, Beryl was waiting, eyes bright with mischief. Well, hello there, Beryl greeted, amusement glinting in her gaze. You look so much better than the last time I saw you. Lyra slid into the seat beside her, cheeks warming. Embarrassing, knowing her new friend had seen her like that. Thank you for that night, she murmured. For healing me. Beryl waved it off. You don't need to thank me. Then she leaned closer, folding her arms on the desk, eyebrows wiggling. So, have you been with Julian all this time? Heat flooded Lyra's face. She glanced around, pulse spiking, checking that no one was listening. When no one seemed to care, she turned back and pressed a finger to her lips. Shh. Beryl only dropped her voice to a whisper. Come on, tell me. What's going on between you two? Nothing, Lyra said, fingers fidgeting. He was just helping me out. Her gaze snagged on Crystal across the room, chatting with a pair of students. Right. Julian was just helping. She might be his mate, but she wasn't the one he intended to mate and keep by his side. He's your mate, isn't he? Beryl pressed. He was so concerned that night, and the way he looked at you, it was all-consuming. A flutter rose in Lyra's chest. Had he really? She bit back the urge to ask again, to hear it out loud. He was just being kind, she said. Even to her own ears, it sounded absurd. Julian was often anything but kind to her. Before Beryl could answer, the chatter died. Principal Sterling strode to the front, his sharp gaze cutting across the room until it landed on Crystal Black. Crystal Black, he called out, you have been expelled from the Royal Academy. You must leave immediately. His eyes moved over the rest of the class. Let this be a warning. Your status does not excuse you from the rules. Any indiscipline will be handled seriously. Be on your best behavior. That's all. Miss Black, you have 5 minutes to vacate the premises. He left, and whispers exploded. Lyra turned to Beryl, puzzled. What did she do? She tried to sabotage other people's training, Beryl said. She wanted to come first. Oh, Lyra glanced at Crystal. She could absolutely see it. At least the Royal Academy wasn't biased when it came to enforcement. The king will hear of this, Crystal announced, swinging her bag onto her shoulder. She swept a scornful look around the room. I'm his future queen. Nobody can throw me out. Silence followed her as she stomped out. The second she disappeared, the room buzzed again. Inside, Lyra exhaled. With Crystal gone, training might finally get easier. The next morning, on her way to school, Lyra spotted Crystal at the palace entrance with luggage piled beside a car. Apparently, Julian hadn't helped her get reinstated. He'd ordered her to leave the palace. Crystal's face twisted when she saw Lyra. Lyra tried to keep walking, but Crystal stepped into her path, forcing her to stop. "You must think that now I'm gone, you can do whatever you want," Crystal said. "I'm only going home to spend time with my family before the wedding, and I'll be back. You'd better not do anything to cross me, or I'll make you pay when I return." Lyra set a pleasant, mocking smile in place. Everyone knew Julian had sent Crystal away for tarnishing the royal family's reputation. "I hope you have a nice time with your family." "Oh, I will," Crystal said, her fake smile even brighter. She turned, climbed into the waiting car, and was gone. "He really let her leave," Ray said as Lyra resumed walking. "Does this mean he's not marrying her anymore?" Lyra hadn't expected Julian to go as far as expelling Crystal from the palace. The fact that he had a small spark of hope flickered to life. Foolish. Dangerous. "I told you. He cares about us," Ray continued. "Don't be ridiculous," Lyra muttered. Ray had been building that idea over the 3 days Lyra spent with Julian, but Lyra knew better. His staying with her had been a natural response to her heat, nothing more. "If he didn't care," Ray argued, "he could have left you alone. Maybe he's changed his mind about Crystal. Why send her away and humiliate her otherwise?" Lyra kept repeating to herself, "Be realistic, don't feed senseless hopes," and yet, even in those brief moments when the heat ebbed, he'd been attentive, almost gentle. She didn't dare assume Crystal's exile had anything to do with her, but maybe he did care. A little. Out loud, she said, "He might have humiliated her, but he could be planning a bigger humiliation for me. Don't get your hopes up." Right. They couldn't both lose their heads. Ray could run wild. Lyra had to keep them steady. That way, when Julian showed his true face again, the fall wouldn't be so hard. At the academy, the first class was combat. Lyra had missed the early sessions, and they'd already moved on to tougher drills. It was daunting, but she refused to break. She pushed through every circuit, every strike and block. At the end, the trainer nodded. "You've done quite well, Miss Jenkins. Better than I'd expected. Keep it up." "Thank you, sir," Lyra said, cheeks aching with her grin. Beryl hooked her arm through Lyra's. "I told you. You're better than most of them." "You're flattering me," Lyra said, shy. "I'm not." Beryl tipped her head toward the room. "Look at all those envious, angry looks. They've been looking down on you for ages, and now you've surpassed them. Bitter pill, isn't it?" Beryl was right. Plenty of unsavory glances were flying her way, the same faces that would have sneered if she'd failed. There was no winning with this lot. She didn't care. She wasn't here to please them. She was here to learn. After drills, the trainer paired them off for a wild combat practical. Across the room, Victoria, the she-wolf who'd chased Zero forever, was eyeing Lyra like prey. Beryl shot her a hard look, a silent warning. Victoria lifted her chin and sauntered over, eyes skimming Lyra with open distaste. "If it isn't the teacher's pet," she said. Beryl flashed a wide, fake smile. "Jealous? She outperformed you?" Victoria scoffed. "Don't be absurd. How could an Omega perform better than me? My ancestors would turn in their graves." "In that case, they're a few seconds from breaking through their caskets," Beryl said briskly. Victoria rolled her eyes. "Let's see how she performs in the wild." Her attention snapped back to Lyra. "You're nothing but an Omega. Your odds in the forest are non-existent. Kneeling and begging for mercy will do you more good." "And if she has no odds," Beryl countered, "why do you need to threaten her? Afraid she'll outshine you again?" Lyra touched Beryl's arm. It's okay, I've got this. Then met Victoria's gaze, steady. How about this? If I catch more prey than you apologize and leave me alone. Unfathomable, Victoria said with a cold laugh. If there were any chance you could beat me. Lyra's smile flattened. Then you've no objection. Challenge accepted. When Victoria stalked off, Beryl glanced at Lyra, uneasy. If you lose, she'll make your life miserable. She won't win, Lyra said, sure. That's the spirit, Beryl grinned. We'll kick her arse. The practical began, and pairs disappeared beneath the trees. There weren't supposed to be any powerful opponents out there, which made it relatively safe. Less than an hour in, a sharp, metallic tang cut through the green, blood. They froze. The scent wasn't just blood, it was werewolf and familiar. Lyra and Beryl traded a look, fear mirrored in their eyes. Something was wrong. Beryl's wolf snapped to full alert, a cold warning prickling along her spine. She turned to Lyra, worry flickering across her face. We should leave. It's not safe out here. That's Victoria's scent, right? Lyra sniffed the air, recognition tightening her voice. She might be injured. I know, Beryl said, jaw tense. But there's another scent too, worse. She took Lyra's hand. She deserves whatever came to her. Let's get out of here. We can't just leave her. Lyra's stomach turned, but her voice stayed steady. Victoria wasn't her biggest fan, sure. Still, what if her life's in danger? Maybe we should go back and report, Beryl said. Her wolf paced inside her, uneasy. They'll send warriors to check it out. Whatever's out there, neither of us can face it. But it might be too late by the time they find her, Lyra pressed. It's not safe for us either, Beryl argued. It's not worth walking into danger because of her. How about you go and call for help, and I'll look for her, Lyra suggested. What? No, Beryl snapped. I can't leave you out here alone. You can shift, but I can't. You'll reach the academy much faster. Lyra held her gaze. Don't worry, I won't rush into danger. If I can't help her alone, I'll wait for you to get back with backup. You're crazy, Beryl muttered, hating every bit of it. She hesitated. She was nasty to you. Why do you care what happens to her? I don't hate her enough to leave her to die, Lyra said. Besides, if we rescue her, maybe she'll leave me alone, right? Probably. Not from gratitude, just humiliation at being saved by an Omega. Beryl knew Victoria's pride too well. Beryl squeezed Lyra's hand. Promise me you'll be careful. Don't get into any fight you can't handle. I won't, Lyra promised. I'm good at survival. Beryl pressed her lips together, then nodded. All right, I'll be back soon. She pulled Lyra into a quick hug, stepped back and shifted, bones reshaping, fur bursting forth, then tore off toward the school, a blur between the trees. Lyra moved toward the blood scent, each step cautious, each breath shallow. The iron tang thickened. Through a screen of leaves, a massive wolf came into view. Her eyes widened. He was huge. She went still, every muscle locked. Not far from the beast, Victoria lay in a dark pool, limp as a rag doll. Lyra slapped her palms over her mouth to smother a gasp. Her breathing quickened anyway. Steady, steady. She inhaled behind her hands, forcing calm into her lungs. Waiting for Beryl wasn't an option. The wolf could rip Victoria apart at any moment. Her gaze swept the clearing. Near Victoria, a boulder rose from the earth, draped in thick green climbers. Between the hanging plants, an opening, a cave. Small, but maybe she could maneuver inside. Decision made, she groped for a rock at her feet. She stepped back, wound up, and hurled it as far south as she could. The wolf halted, muzzle lifting, ears pricking. His head swiveled toward the sound. For a heartbeat, Lyra's hope faltered. Then he began to stalk that way, slow and deliberate. She counted the seconds, eyes tracking him, then slipped from cover, tiptoeing toward Victoria. The she-wolf was unconscious, but her pulse fluttered steady beneath Lyra's fingers. Breath, thank God, still moving in and out. Lyra hooked her arms under Victoria's shoulders and dragged, boots skidding, muscles burning. The vines parted to a narrow mouth of stone. Up close, her heart sank. The cave was tiny. Two wouldn't fit. No time to find another hide. Think later. Move now. She wedged Victoria through the opening, angling her gently, inch by inch, until the body slid inside. Even if the wolf found them, he couldn't reach her. Lyra pulled the plants back over the entrance, fingers trembling, then darted around the boulder. A growl rolled through the forest a moment later. Deep, resonant, close. Hello? Who is there? The voice that followed was monstrously calm. Lyra dived into the thickest bush she could find, curled tight, and covered her face. One advantage, because she couldn't shift, her scent wasn't as sharp as other werewolves. With the air already saturated with blood, tracking her would be harder. Come out, the voice coaxed. You took away my friend. Shouldn't you at least introduce yourself? Mocking, not angry. He knew she was near. He was sure he'd find her. If he did, she'd be dead. Leaves rustled nearby. Her heartbeat spiked, loud in her ears. She screwed her eyes shut, childish, stupid, like not seeing him meant he couldn't see her. If you show yourself, the monster said, I'll be nice. But if you waste any more of my time, well, I can't promise to be a gentleman. Lyra bit her lip until it hurt. His steps were getting closer. Thud, thud. She cracked her eyes open. The wolf stood about 50 yards away, facing the trees. Then he turned, and his gaze slid toward her bush. Lyra's breath hitched, just a tiny sound. Enough. A heartbeat later, yellow eyes stared through the thicket, unblinking. She didn't think, she bolted. Branches slapped her cheeks, twigs snapped underfoot, and the forest floor jolted her stride. She didn't know where she was going, just away. Her eyes hunted for cover, anywhere to disappear. Trees. She couldn't beat him on the ground, but if she climbed, if she got high enough, his size might slow him down. It wouldn't buy much time, but maybe enough for Beryl to return. She spotted a tall trunk rising above the rest and sprinted for it. She was a few feet out when someone, snatched her from behind and lifted her clean off the ground. She shrieked, terror tearing free. Oh God, is this how I die?